All right, ladies and gentlemen, so this is the second part of our review of elementary school and seventh grade middle school world history. We had gone through the origins of humankind and how we are still connected to them by biology. We spoke about the scars of evolution. Hopefully you have learned something from that you had not known before. And I hope that you might have wanted to do a little extra research and find out even more for yourselves. We looked at early civilization, where civilization began all over the world, but we're focusing on the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia, and of course Europe at the very, very beginning. And I said before we would now next move to ancient Rome. So this is where we're going to do. Did I say Rome? I meant Greek civilization. Now, all of you are well versed in Greek civilization, probably learned a great deal, but hopefully I will be able to share with you stuff that you might have never heard of before. The first people coming into Greece, of course, we're not 100% sure. We have evidence that says Crete may have been the first place and so forth. But what's really important is when the first settlers came into Greece, they looked around where they were and really did something that was completely extraordinary for the time. We don't think it's extraordinary today, but the Greeks were among the first people to do this. And the answer is they started asking questions like, well, here we are on this land, which is semi-desert, doesn't grow many things. What on earth are we going to do to make it better? And this led to a series of questions that would help lead to Greek civilization and the type of civilization and culture we have here in the West. Amongst the ways that the Greeks, or among the strategies the Greeks came about, include a great deal of technology. The water mill is a good example of Greek technology, a way to harness the energy from running streams or rivers and then put them to good use. This technology is still used today. You can see an old-fashioned water wheel near a water house used, let's say, to grind corn or something like that, to grind wheat. But we also have modern-day water mills. This is a water turbine. The water goes down a channel, which you can see on the bottom left-hand corner. As it comes down, it begins to swirl, and then it goes into the hole, spinning. That spinning motion increases the speed of the river and ends up with enough power to be able to run a home with electricity. Not too bad from a primitive technology that the Greeks had helped to pioneer. The Greeks were the first to give us the alarm clock. And the alarm clock, as you see in the picture both pictures run by the use of water. The second one, the one over to the right, is your best example. You can see, not too clearly, but you can see going into a funnel, water that comes in a measured amount that goes into the funnel. You can see there a piston, and so as the water comes in, the piston rises slowly, and my gosh, you got a clock. You can set up to make a noise at certain places, and you will be woken up. Not bad, again, except if it freezes. If it's a cold day and it freezes, then your clock stops working. We, of course, still use alarm clocks today. I don't know about you, but I want this Hello Kitty clock. That is my clock. That's all I can say. The Greeks were among the first that we know of in the West to give us cartography, that is to say, for map making. You can see here a copy of an early map that they had at the time. You can tell it comes from Greece because look at all the geographic information they had about Greece. You can see the mountains and the islands are there. And as they move further away from Greece, the information becomes less and less and less clear. England doesn't quite look like that in the real map. Northern Africa is not a peninsula, and as you move all the way down to India, or Indians as they have it there, it's completely messed up, and there's no information at all about what's going on in Asia or so. It was Anaximander, I hope I said it right, who is the pioneer of cartography in Greece. By the way, if you miss the spellings or anything like that, don't worry, you'll be able to review the video and see it again for yourselves. Cartography, of course, is something that we today use to get around. Our cartography is much more sophisticated, and you know, we don't even have to think of directions anymore. All we have to do is turn on the GPS on our phones, and boom, we know where we are. Soon, no one's going to know where east, north, south, or west is. And, well, all of you know this area where we are. And my house is not on this part of the map. Darn it. Greek civilization gave us the Olympics, a way to celebrate athleticism. Originally, the Olympians would wrestle and run and throw javelins in the nude. We can't do that today. That may cause a little bit of trouble. But the Olympics went on for a very, very, very long time. By the way, the Olympics was one of 4 games. The Olympics came every 4 years, but there were other events that were also 4 years. So after the Olympics, there would be another great festival. I honestly don't know what they were called, and another one, then we'd be back to the Olympics. So the Olympics is the only one that we chose to bring back at the turn of the 20th century. And unfortunately, due to COVID, there is no Olympics now in the modern days. A little bit of trivia. Don't worry, you don't have to remember this or even write this down. The 5 rings stand for the 5 continents with people on them. And here in LA, we had the Olympics back in 1932. I don't think any of you remember it. I don't remember it because I wasn't born, but and so forth. Back in 1984, we had the Olympics again, and I remember it quite well. It was really something. If you go to CPE, Cerritos Park East, and go to the swim center, as you go into the entrance, look over to the left, you'll see a plaque, and the plaque over it has the Olympic symbol on it, because our CPE was used as one of the training centers for world athletes for the 1984 games, which is pretty cool. There used to be, right underneath the plaque, a bench that was used in the Olympics. It had that symbol on it and so forth, but during the years it just got old and they took it out. But that was quite something to see. The 1984 Olympics, by the way, was very, very popular and lots of fun to do. We are, of course, hosting the Olympics in 2024. That's my understanding. Our symbol will be the angel for the City of Angels. I think that is, again, pretty awesome. The Greeks were among the first in the West to come up with the basis of geometry, that is to say, the measurements of shapes and all of that good stuff. Thales of Miletus came up with all sorts of different rules, like things which are equal to the same thing are equal to another, to the whole is greater than the part, things that are half, and so on and so on and so forth. So if you're having problem in your geography class or in your geography lessons in math, blame Thales for getting the ball started. Pythagoras is also one of the great persons to blame or love for geometry, coming up with the Pythagorean theory, which most of you are pretty much aware of. In my advanced age, I don't have to worry about such things because no one ever asks me about the relationship between triangles and triangle parts. Euclid was also one of the great pioneers of geometry itself, coming up with many of the calculations, and in fact a whole school of geometry called Euclidean geometry. That's the basic stuff that you learn. There are other schools of geometry that deals with different, more esoteric things that you don't need to worry about in high school, but in college and university, if you continue on the path of math, you definitely will need to know this stuff. All right. Archimedes was also part of this geometry, or one could almost say physics. Discovered how fluids are displaced by objects and so forth, allowed us to be able to weigh or figure out how much volume we have in a fluid. They say that he had solved the problem when he was sitting in the tub and noticed the displacement of the water as he went in, and he screamed out, "Eureka!" meaning I have found it. I have found the solution to the problem I had. I don't believe it really happened, but it's a good story, so let's keep it at that. He also came up with a screw, Archimedes screw, that is pretty darn clever. Allowed water to be brought from a lower location to a higher location. So you can see here the screw is turning around. Maybe it's turning around due to the movement of, or the movement of the stream. Water gets into the screw, it turns around, and inside you have, as you can see, a arrangement of wood that then pushes the water that has gone in there up until it reaches a much higher level. So it's a good way to get, let's say, a supply of water into your home if you don't have someone to bring it up to you. The Greeks helped bring in the earliest practice of medicine. Hippocrates of Kos is considered the founder of modern Western medicine, and he is known, of course, for the Hippocratic Oath that all doctors are supposed to adhere to. That when you do medicine, you do this for good and not for evil, which means that even if your enemy is in front of you and he's hurt and you are a doctor, you are obligated to cure him. The anthropologist Margaret Mead said something about our use of medicine when she was asked what's the most important innovation of human beings. Everyone expected her to say, oh, well, the finding water, the fire, harnessing fire, or the wheel, and so forth. And she said, no, the most important discovery, or the most important thing that human beings have ever done was healing, learning how to heal, because that showed that we were willing to take the time to help someone who was helpless and make them feel better, instead of, let's say, what a mere animal would do, leave them to die. That's really, she said, the sign of our humanity and maybe our greatest invention of all. If anything, the Greeks are to remember on, of course, it's to be philosophy, the questions that everybody asks about why we're here and so forth. The person considered the father of modern philosophy is Socrates, and you've all heard about Socrates. He never wrote anything. His students wrote about his life and his works. But Socrates had an interest in knowing what truth was. And I mean, if I go and ask you what is truth, or what does it mean to know something, chances are that you probably wouldn't be able to answer. He asked this question, how do I know that I'm a wise man? How do I know that I know? And these questions and more, his answers to them have lasted even to this day. He was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens by asking questions, even questioning the existence of the gods, and he was forced to drink hemlock, a type of poison, and die. He could have escaped, but he was so true to his ideals of doing what is right that he drank it, because he felt these people who judge me have been put to judge me legally, and I have no right to disobey them. I don't know about you, but that's quite a brave thing that he did. You can get an idea about his work. You begin by asking a challenging, open-ended question like, why is the sky blue? And then you build on that first question by asking why. I mean, why is it sometimes red? Why is it sometimes gray? Where does the sun go at night? And you come up with ideas based on these questions. Well, the sky is blue because the sky is a dome and like glass, and the other side is water. So the blue is for water. And then you interrogate your ideas with continued questions. You might say, well, wait a minute, how come it doesn't fog over because it is water, and so forth. And you repeat the steps until you get better and come closer to the best solution. And again, he believes it is ideal if you ask these questions of a group of people to get different perspectives. Now, of course, for the real world, this does not really work because, your assumptions may be wrong and you can come up with really weird conclusions. But one could say it is the first building block of what would become the scientific method. And of course, the scientific method, and if you haven't learned about that yet, you certainly will in biology, is the foundation stone for our modern technological world. As I said before, he decided to commit suicide in front of his followers. Here he is drinking some hemlock. And if you look all the way to the right, there is a man at the foot of Socrates' bed who looks like he's half asleep. He's in mourning. That is Socrates' greatest student, the next person in our group, Plato. Plato was the one who wrote up Socrates' stuff. So we really don't know if what Socrates supposedly said was really Socrates' words or Plato's words. But Plato was a great philosopher in his own right, shared the ideas of Socrates, and even went further in books like The Republic, where he came up with a perfect government for nations to use, which included the idea of the rulers being what are called philosopher kings. He said that all other types, regular soldiers and businessmen and merchants and workers, none of these are good enough to lead a people. A person must be educated to rule, and that person must be a philosopher. Of course, an old man as well, because they, of course, know more than everyone else. He had a student as well, Plato had a student as well called Aristotle, who has given us many foundations for science. In fact, the science that he wrote about over 2,000 years ago was really everything that we knew about the world until the beginning of the scientific revolution, which I'll be getting to in a week or so. He attempted some type of experimentation. He didn't do a very good job at it. For example, he believed that people had naturally 28 teeth when all he had to do was check someone else's mouth and notice they had more. So he was very much flawed. He's very influential from his book called Politics, where again he spoke about how to create a perfect society. Of course, no one would want the society that he created in his book, but it is still the basis of political philosophy as we understand it and how we rule each other today. Aristotle had one of the most famous students of all, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was Aristotle's student. He learned what he could and then went on to conquer the known world at the time from the European point of view, reaching nearly to India itself. Alexander the Great, in fact, is mentioned in the Bible for his conquests and so forth. As you can see, from Macedonia up in northern Greece all the way to the left, he did a darn good job. Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, Egypt, again, all the way down to the Indus River Valley, where many of his soldiers lived, and even today there are descendants of Alexander's men in that part of the world. An interesting thing, he came to Egypt, set up a new family to rule. That family would be the same family as that would eventually give us Cleopatra. Cleopatra was not Egyptian, she was Greek, which most people don't know. Greek civilization is, of course, remembered for its religion. And we have the Greek Parthenon, which most of you are familiar with, and in fact has been used over and over and over again. Many of you may have been introduced by Marvel Comics, which used people like Hercules and so forth for their stuff. These gods and goddesses explained to the Greek from the Greek point of view how the universe worked and made everything make sense. Now, if you were sophisticated, if you were very well educated, you really didn't believe in the gods as true figures. You looked at more of them as metaphorically, as a symbol. When you read Plato, when you read Socrates, they don't speak of the god so much as God himself. It's almost a monotheistic way of looking at things. But even so, we still keep with the Greek pantheon of people. And many of these names you are very much familiar with, like Neptune, Jupiter, Vulcan, and so on and so forth. The Greeks also were among the first to create something in their mythology that is still with us today. And if you take a look way at the top, move away from the other stuff. You shouldn't be looking at that. And this is art, so I can show it. You can see the angels up above. It was the Greeks who invented angels as we know or we understand them. I'll get back to that in a moment. Of course, Disney has stolen all sorts of cool stuff from the Greek pantheon and the like. Back to angels. These were some pictures of the Greek angels. They had this image of beings with wings and so forth. And we in our time have adopted these things as well. Here is an angel just outside of Whitney High School. That's a picture of the palm tree that I took. By the Renaissance, we turned the angels into cute little things, and we still love angels today. We use them in all sorts of images and so forth, and talk about guardian angels and things like that. It is very interesting that Judaism, it is believed by some, borrowed the idea of angels, because in those days so much religion had moved from others. But their idea of angels were very different. No, not the baseball team. They're not Los Angeles. No, not that either. If you read the biblical accounts of angels, they're actually very, very scary. You can see over to the left, angels had 4 heads. One is not showing here, and wings. The middle is one of the most famous descriptions. I think that is considered a throne. It is just merely a flying set of rings with eyes looking at you. I don't know about you, I'd be scared if I saw that. And other angels which are nothing but wings and so on and so forth. Again, this depiction of Judaism then got mixed in with the Greek depictions of angels until we had the type of angels that everyone understands and sees. The Greeks are given credit for the concept of democracy as we know it. This is not to say the Greeks were democratic at all. Most of the people who lived in Greece at the time were slaves or lowly workers and so forth who had absolutely no rights. But if you were at the top of the tree, if you were that 1% of Greece, you had a chance to participate in the forums and so forth and argue about how things could or should be. All right. Greek civilization eventually fell, and I'm not going to go into that because that's not really important. But as Greece was coming to its last days, you had the successor or the rival to Greece, and that would be Rome and the Roman Empire, which is the next major part of our look at the ancient world. Rome, as you're probably aware of, began as a small city-state in the Italian peninsula. In the map that you're looking at over there, you can see Rome as this little splotch of red between Eritrea and Latium. Rome discovered very, very quickly of the importance of a military in order to survive. It was conquer or be conquered, and the Romans became very, very good at that, eventually conquering their neighbors like Latium and Eritrea and so forth, forcing them into what would eventually be the Roman Republic. As Rome spread through hundreds and hundreds of years, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, by around the beginning of the first millennium, they chucked their republic run by the Senate and instead brought in a series of emperors which would last a long, long time. Rome became the dominant power of Europe. Rome was so great and so strong that it actually knew about and traded with the great Chinese empires all the way out to the east. There's even evidence of Romans going to China because we have found Roman coins in that part of the world. And also we have found evidence of Chinese goods in Rome, like rare silks and so forth. So everyone knew about each other, but they were so far that neither was a threat. So, heck, they both said, "You're great," and that's it, which I think is okay. Our Roman heritage includes the language of Latin. Much of English, of course, is made out of Latin words. The Romance languages like French, Spanish, Portuguese, and so forth are of Latin origin. Italian especially made up of it. There are no, Latin was the language for intellectuals back in the day. If you went to college or university, you learned Latin because that's what all the academic books were written in. It would not be until the Renaissance that people started writing in their own languages. And of course, Latin is the language of the Catholic Church even today. And we can see the influence of Latin in our language today. For example, looking down a bit, the term felic, which meant happy or merry, has given us words like felicity. Fid or fis means trust or faith. That's where we get the word confined. Exter or extra means outer, where we get the word exterior. If you want to learn vocabulary for your SATs in a few years, learning the Latin roots is very helpful to learn the meaning of words. As I said before, the Latin is the language of the Catholic Church, and if you ever visit the Vatican and go to an ATM machine there, one of your choices, well, you got a choice of English, of Italian, of French, and German, but one of your choices is also Latin. So if a priest goes in, they know their Latin, they can get their money out from there. Or if an ancient Roman happens to have an ATM and is time traveling, they can go and use the ATM as well, and they'll be perfectly at home. As I said before, it was an academic language. I don't have to go through that again. Yes, let me go through that one. Yes. Now I remember what this slide is about. Because of Latin, the Romans also helped to establish our learning, our schools of learning. Back in the day, when you went to college or university, or even what would be considered elementary school, you had the 7 subjects that you studied, that we still study more or less today. Grammar, that is to say, the putting together of words and their meanings. Logic, putting together ideas and coming up with new ideas from that. Rhetoric, the art of speaking. You got to remember, back then, very few people read, and most people listened to their knowledge. Rhetoric was a way to teach people how to speak. We still have rhetoric today for speakers, but especially for lawyers. Music, because music was considered a branch of mathematics and also was a sign that you were cultivated. Arithmetic, this is simple addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, although they did have some more sophisticated stuff. They didn't go for algebra or anything like that. That would come a little bit later. Geometry, so you would know where you were. And the last one was astronomy, which was very helpful if you were going to sail. So all of these things that you were expected to learn, and everyone who was educated learned this and learned it pretty darn well. And here we go. Another things that they gave us was calendar and measurements. The gentleman that you can see here that popped in is Julius Caesar. So popular was he, or so well known was he, that they actually developed a calendar based upon him and his calculations, the Julian calendar. During those days, everyone had noticed that the year was not 365 days, and they realized that every 4 years they had to add an extra day for the leap year. It was under the Julius Caesar that he realized that this may not be a good thing, because it doesn't take into account certain other problems with the calendar. And so because of the Julian calendar, we end up occasionally dropping a date every few hundred years. It worked really well until they noticed that the Julian calendar was also wrong, but it lasted for about for nearly 1700 years. The days of the week are a heritage of the Roman Empire. For example, Monday is named after the goddess Luna, after the moon, and you can see Lunes and Lundi and Lunes and so on and so forth for her. Tuesday is named after Mars, and you can see here in all the other Romance languages, Romanian and Spanish, Martis, Maldi, and so on and so forth. It's not until you get to the German that it starts looking stupid. Wednesday is for Mercury, and that's why we have Mercredi in French and Mercukir in Albanian, and so on and so on and so forth. Again, it doesn't get funky until you get to like German, where it goes to Mittwoch, which sounds like a very bad meat dish. They gave us for Thursday was named after Jupiter, and we can see in Spanish it's Jueves and Joi in Romanian and Giovedì in Italian. Friday is named after Venus. Maybe that's why we love Friday, because we know it's the end of the week and it's a time for, sitting back with your best gal, your best guy, and whatever. But Venus was known as Venus, so we get Venedi, Venedis, Veniri, and so on and so forth. Again, when we get to the German, it gets really, really weird. Saturn is for Saturday, and we got Sábado for Spanish. We got Sambata for Romanian, and so on and so on and so forth. By the way, Saturn was the god who ate his babies. Really nice guy. And Sunday, of course, is named after the god Sol. Here, let's wait for this to go by. Darn, Sol is big. Anyway, Sol, and we have Solis and the other variations of it, Dominica, and so on and so on and so forth. So that's where we get some of our heritage. Roman numerals is also the heritage that we got. Roman numerals really work well if your mathematics is limited. And back in the day, their math was very, very limited. If you wanted to divide or multiply, you basically had to guess and then work out the calculations, and if the calculations didn't work, you had to start all over from the very, very beginning. It's my understanding that you guys really don't learn to do Roman numerals. I'm not going to go do a course on it, but it's important for you to learn so that you can read old movie titles and things like that. It wasn't until the bringing out of Arabic numbers, which originally came from India, and the concept of zero, that we were able to move to more advanced mathematics later on. The Roman Empire gave us the modern clock face, which was in Roman numerals, as you can see. And I believe they were responsible for taking the 24-hour clock that we inherited from the Sumerians and divided it into 24 hours. Again, which I think is pretty cool. The Romans gave us a great deal of science and technology that we should be grateful to them today. One of the first things they brought in was the Ptolemaic model of the solar system, which speculated that the Earth was the center of the universe and that all the planets and the stars revolved around it. And when you think about it, that really does make sense. I mean, you know, it's early morning, you look, the sun is moving, right? The sun is rising. It's so much common sense, right? The moon is moving. We can tell that, and so forth. Now, of course, we know very different that the sun is in the center, but really don't look upon these people as stupid. They just understood things differently than we did. And from that point of view, it made a lot of darn good sense, and it did help them to understand the universe not so much as something weird and magical, but something that worked logically, that could be explained. By the way, the Ptolemaic model of the solar system was not just the simple revolutions around the Earth, but there were revolutions within revolutions. You see, these things called epicycles. That's what they used to explain strange movements of the planets that really could only be explained if the sun was in the center. But they came up with a mathematical formula to show that the sun didn't need to be in the center. Again, pretty darn good, pretty darn clever. They gave us the seeds of modern algebra. Diophantus was among the first, with many early calculations and so forth. We have some of this stuff is still up and available today, but again, nowhere is near as good as the as Muslim civilization would bring to us. In fact, it would be Muhammad ibn Musa and I can't say it, Qaradini, well, you can say it, the mathematician, astronomer, geographer, historian, his work coming to the West after the fall of the Roman Empire, which would give us true algebra and all the other things that hopefully you are enjoying and not suffering for right now. Believe it or not, the Romans had the earliest steam engines of all, but they only used them as toys or to impress people. I'll explain that in a moment. Here is an example of what we believe that their earliest steam engines look like. It had a fire underneath. Inside the basin is water, and as the water started boiling, it would go up the tubes that you can see and into this globe and out through these little nozzles. This was a way for priests to show that the gods exist. So, you know, you might be a non-believer or something like that. You go up to the Temple of Venus, and you know you're arguing with the priest, and the priest says, "Oh, wait a minute, let me show you a miracle." And then they put this little device into play, and you know you don't know what's going on. You're just seeing this moving like magic, and it's like, wow, Venus did it. It's real. It's real. The gods are real. And meanwhile, the priest is going, well, you know, thank you, Venus, for giving us this technology, and so forth. They even use it for little toys that Roman children would play with. But no one ever made the leap to turning the steam into power for things like engines and so forth, which happened during the Industrial Revolution. And why should they? They had plenty of slaves. And, you know, why bother with machines when people can be told what to do instead of programmed? Now, by the way, here's a reproduction of what they think the Roman toy car was like. I think that's pretty darn clever, and I would like to have something like that as well. Engineering and architecture is part of the Roman heritage as well. Many Roman roads still exist. I believe this is the what's left of one of the Roman roads in Pompeii, um, for foot traffic and for chariots and so on and so forth. If you've ever been to the Forum in Rome, you can see what the Roman roads are like. Many of the routes in Europe, for example, are taken from the earliest Roman roads. We, of course, have very much improved on building and so forth. If the Roman roads were to be made as a subway map, this is kind of what you would be looking at. You can see Rome in the center, with the major roads coming out, going all over to what is now France, over to Spain, over to what is now Istanbul, over into Turkey, into the Middle East, and so forth. During times of peace, you can just follow these roads, and they were good. They facilitated trade, travel, tourism. Yes, they had tourism back then too, and anything else that you might need. Pretty darn good. Roman aqueducts were so well built that many of them are still up and working today. I believe this aqueduct is in Spain. This is an incredible marvel of engineering. Notice the arches there. They had discovered how to make arches which allowed them to hold incredible amounts of weight with relatively few bricks and things like that. Allowed them to build much larger by creating load-bearing columns and so on and so forth. If you don't know how an aqueduct works, you have a water source which is, let's say, up in a hill or a mountain, and the aqueduct is gently slopes at something like a half a degree or so, going miles and miles and miles and miles. It's enough to allow the water to flow, and some of these aqueducts would allow water to flow for 30, 40, 50, 60 miles, bringing in good fresh water from the mountainous streams instead of the very dangerous water from local streams because of pollution, microorganisms, and so forth. Once again, some of these aqueducts are still working. It's my understanding that many of the fountains in Rome are still using many of these ancient water supplies. So not too bad. Among the things the Romans loved were their baths, and they brought in the modern term from them. We get the modern term of bath from the English city of Bath, where they began. This was another marvel of engineering because they had hidden rooms where water was heated, and other hidden rooms where water was cooled, so that one could go in, take a nice warm bath, and then immediately move over and do a frozen bath, and back and forth. It was supposed to be good for the health. The bath that you're looking at is the bath at Bath in Britain. I've been there a few times. It's very nice. If you ever get to visit, go in there. It was used as late as the 1830s, I believe. People still would take baths in it. But by the time you got to the 1830s, it was basically a large petri dish. It was filled with germs and all that stuff. The British didn't know anything about cleanliness at the time. Eek. It was the Romans who invented concrete. And concrete is a little bit different than cement. Concrete is cement and rocks and a couple of other things. But the Romans had a recipe for concrete so good that it allowed many of their structures to still remain upright. If you ever go to the Pantheon in Rome, which is the temple to all gods, the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages tried to bring it down because it was a pagan home for gods, but it was built so well, the concrete was so good that they couldn't bring it down, and they decided, okay, let's leave it there and just turn it into a church. We don't know what the exact formula for concrete was, and We believe if we could ever find it, or at least a source of their concrete, of the chemicals composition of their concrete, we might today be able to build stuff even better than we do now. This is the Parthenon that I had mentioned before. These columns over here are what the ancient church had tried to pull down, and they could not. When you go and actually, when you go down to there, you can actually see where they chiseled places to put ropes to get them down. In fact, if you look at the column facing you over at the corner, in the middle you see what looks like marks. Those are where they would put the ropes, but it failed. It has among the most beautiful domes in the world. It's still up there. This is ancient Roman building back in the day. And today it is a place where the heroes of Italy are buried, including people like Victor Emmanuel II and Garibaldi. So it is an incredible space. If you've ever been there, you remember it. And if you've never been there, please go and try to see it. Part of our Roman heritage is government. You notice some things that are very similar to American. The idea of a Senate and Assembly come from the Roman Empire. The idea was the Assembly was made up of the people, the peons, folks like you or I. The 1% were represented by the Senate. And from the Senate, you get the councils, who in essence ran the country, sort of like having 2 or 3 people as president of the United States. This system would still remain in place after the empire was established, except that above the councils came the emperor. And in fact, this is what we're looking at right now. We today, of course, get from the Romans our concepts of government. The councils have been replaced by a president, his advisors, which one could say, well, many of these people are senators and so forth. I mean, again, we're still using the same ideas and so forth as was used back in the day in Rome. Here's our modern Senate today. And here's the peons being spoken to by the Assembly. This, of course, is our House of Representatives today. They helped give the jury system as we understand it. Men who were asked to judge after hearing a debate the merits of a legal case. Much of Roman law, in fact, was so good that it spread around the world. And in the southern part of Europe, some variation has still been used today. If you go around the city of Rome and look, you'll see these initial SPQR everywhere, from walls to the lids of sewer containers. And this means, this is in Latin, it comes to by order of the Senate in Rome. So a little bit of there. See, Senatus Publici Romanus, the Senate and the people of Rome. All right. Rome eventually became too big for its britches, so to speak. They had conquered so much territory that around 400 CE or AD, it was decided to split the empire in half, to a western half and an eastern half. The western half would keep Rome as its capital, while the eastern and richer part got as its capital Constantinople, which of course now is known as Byzantium. And we can see the split, we can see the split evenly there. Within a few years after the split, barbarian tribes came in, mostly ravaging the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire was less hurt and would end up surviving. But Rome, after it was sacked around 400 or so BC, was never the same and never really recovered. However, Rome would not fall for quite a long time. The Western Empire did, but the Eastern Empire would remain intact in Constantinople, or Byzantium. And in fact, the people of Byzantium called themselves Romans until its fall, way back nearly to the time of Columbus. By the time the Roman Empire had fell and gone, the other part of the Roman Empire, now called the Byzantine Empire, controlled much of Greece, controlled much of what is now modern-day Turkey. And of course, it would be the Roman Empire where we'd get Christianity. This is where I am going to stop. I'm going to stop at the origins of Christianity, and that means also Islam. But I don't have time because we're almost out of time for today. So let me stop, get us back. I know I threw out a heck of a lot of information to you, but that's why this has been recorded and you can go and listen to it again. All right.